Hey guys, Timothy here. So I did not do a spoiler video yesterday for Monday spoilers. I'm going to combine them today with Tuesday spoilers. Yesterday was 4th of July, so a little bit busy. But I hope everybody had a good holiday. And if you aren't in the U.S., then I hope you enjoyed your 4th of July anyway. But we're going to jump right in. We've got a lot of cards to talk about here. The first one here is Mind's Dilation. I'm going to start with Tuesday spoilers and then work my way back to Mondays. But this is the mono blue mythic of the set. It's 5 and 2 blue, so a 7-mana enchantment that says whenever an opponent casts his or her first spell each turn, that player exiles the top card of his or her library. If it's a non-land card, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. This is awesome. Definitely not standard playable. Don't see it anywhere besides EDH, but I'm a huge EDH player, and one of my favorite things to do is use my opponent's cards. I really like cards like this, and this is awesome. The more players you have, the better it gets. Anytime any opponent casts their first spell each turn, you get to just nab the top card of their library. Sometimes it'll pay off, but over the course of a couple turns, people are going to cast spells every turn. You're going to just build up tons and tons of card advantage with this. One thing I really like is that if it's like player 2's turn and player 3 decides to play an instant or something, that still triggers this for player 3 as well as whatever player 2 was going to do. So if somebody wants to cast something on every other player's turn, this is going to trigger every time somebody casts something for the first time each turn, not just on their turn, but each turn. So really cool card. For Commander, I would expect this to be a very, very cheap mythic, just because I don't see it anywhere else besides Commander. But moving on to the mono red mythic, we actually have a dragon on Innistrad. Probably been hanging out with the Hydra too, but Mirrorwing Dragon is really cool. It's 3 and double red, so 5 mana 4/5 flyer, which is good on the vanilla flying test. That's already a decent card. And it says whenever a player, that's you or an opponent, whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery that targets only Mirrorwing Dragon, that player, whoever casts the spell, copies the spell for each other creature he or she controls that the spell could target. Each copy targets a different one of those creatures. So this is really interesting. It's kind of like Zada, but the way Zada worked was it only worked if you cast something that targeted Zada, and then it pumped or it copied whatever you cast on all your creatures, so Expedite or whatever. This is really cool because it has that same effect, but it also works if your opponent targets it. And the way it's worded, let's say your opponent goes to Ruinous Path this. Since your opponent's the one who controls the spell they cast, it actually copies for each of their creatures. So if they go to removal spell, spot removal on Mirrorwing Dragon, they're going to copy that spot removal for every creature they control, which is insane against cards like Declaration in Stone, Anguished Unmaken. Can you imagine someone trying to Anguished Unmaken this and then they hit all their own creatures and lose 3? It's just not going to work out. So this card makes spot removal miserable, and it's out of Languish range. I think this is a very, very strong card. I would expect this to see standard play because of its resilience to spot removal spells. We do have a lot of big flyers in standard right now, so we'll see, but this matches up nicely against Avacyn. It matches up nicely against the removal that is in standard, or at least the removal that's being played. It's out of Grasp of Darkness range, it's out of the Languish range, like I said, and it's out of Chandra range too. Like, it's just really, really well positioned, I think. These 4/5s are good. That's why I think Mind Rack Demon is a little underrated, because 4/5 is a very relevant body on a flyer in this format. This card looks awesome. In draft, it's just a nightmare, I'm sure, to play against. All your removal in draft is spot removal, so one way around it is to find removal that targets another thing, like fight effects. Prey Upon would get around it because Prey Upon has 2 targets. Mirrorwing only works if you target just the Mirrorwing, so I don't know, maybe Grip of Desolation will be like sideboard tech against it because it targets a land as well. Anyway, I believe this is the last mythic, not counting Monday's cards. This is Grim Flayer. It's a black-green for a 2/2 trample. Human warrior. Whenever it deals combat damage, look at the top 3 cards of your library. Put any number of them into the graveyard and the rest on top of your library in any order. And then Delirium gives it +2/+2 if you have 4 card types in your graveyard. This is awesome card. Very early play. Obviously, they are pushing this Delirium deck. They really want green-black Delirium to be a thing, and this is very, very strong in that deck. I think Delirium has the tools it needs to be a playable standard deck. It has the 1/1 Death Touch that gets +2/+2 with Delirium. It has this guy in the 2-drop slot. Cards like whatever the mill 3 get a creature back card is. You have your Soul Swallower, your Mind Rack Demon, you have Kindly Stranger in a 3-drop. There are a lot of good cards, and this was obviously pushed to make it playable. This actually becomes a 4/4 a lot sooner than Sylvan Advocate will get its boost. So they fit in the same kinds of decks, just as a really aggro green-based graveyard deck. This is very strong. That combat damage effect is awesome. It's essentially Scry 3. And then you, like, instead of putting cards on the bottom, you can dump them in the graveyard. This can get Delirium almost by itself. Like, it's definitely a better enabler than just playing a card like Vessel of Nascency or something like that, because it gets a body. But if you can get the Delirium on fast, this is a 4/4 for 2 with Trample. And the Trample is just going to let you keep filter and get rid of whatever cards you don't want on top of your deck. Or if it's 3 cards, you at least get to reorder them, kind of like Sensei's Divine on top. But this is a really awesome card. I will say, I read this somewhere and I kind of agree. The flavor on it's really boring. So I'm a little disappointed that this is a mythic, but at the same time, it feels appropriate because of the deck it fits in. It's just very, very strong. In draft, this card's probably a little bit worse, but still very strong. If your opponent can't block it right away, it just gives you a lot of advantage. Moving on, we got a couple multicolor uncommon cards. I love multicolor uncommon cards because they indicate in a draft like what color combinations are open. Ride Down here is a reprint from Khans of Tarkir, and if you don't know how it works, it says destroy target blocking creature. Creatures that were blocked by that creature this combat gain trample until end of turn. So the way Ride Down works is you attack with something, they block. You play Ride Down on the creature they're blocking with, and it blows it up. And then all your creatures that were blocked by it gain trample, so they're going to deal their combat damage anyway, basically like they weren't blocked. So this is an awesome card. It was a little bit worse in Khans of Tarkir, even though it was still a good card because there were so many token generation things going on in Khans, and lots of early plays. Where you could swarm the field, so just using spot removal to kill a token is a little bit worse, but I think it'll be even better in this format where you're playing real creatures and you're trying to trade up, you're trying to win through combat. Ride Down just lets you win a combat, it just kills a creature. And again, red-white is not like a combination that's super pushed in this format, but this is a really good tool. And also, like, if you see this really late in a pack, it's a very good sign that you should be moving into red-white because it's probably an open combination of colors. I love Ride Down. It was really good in Khans, and uncommon is where it's at again. New art, too. Mourn Willow is our second uncommon here. It's 1 black and a green for a plant skeleton, so no relevant creature types. That's kind of surprising. At 3/2 haste, which is good. I would play a 3-mana 3/2 haste, especially in green-black, which is a combination that is really dirtily, so this lets you put on a lot of pressure. The Delirium ability says when he enters the battlefield, if Delirium is active, creatures with power 2 or less can't block this turn, so awesome. This means that you can just drop this on turn 3 and start beating with it. You can attempt to trade it, but the Delirium activated means, first off, you can basically shut down blocks for a turn on certain boards, or you can stop your opponent from just trading up with this guy using their 2-drop to trade with it. Oftentimes those creatures will be power 2 or less. Unless they're pumped or something. So this just gets in for an attack, or it trades with a creature that's on par with it. Very nice, fits in very appropriate colors, and I like that this is a card that can really add pressure to your opponent while you're trying to get Delirium, and then it has an extra little bonus once you're at Delirium. I think this card's solid. I would definitely draft it, and again, I would take this as a sign that green-black Delirium is super open in a draft. Same goes for this card, Mercurial Geists. This card comes up sometimes and it's really hard to pronounce. Mercurial Geists. This is 2 blue and a red for a flying spirit. So spirit in blue-red is probably not ideal, but spirit nonetheless. There are a couple things that work with that. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, it gets +3/+0 until end of turn. So this is basically a flying Kiln Fiend for 4. In case you've never played against Kiln Fiend, it murders you very quickly with certain combination of cards. There is still a double striking card in limited. Uncaged Fury, and this is the type of card. If you cast Uncaged Fury on this, it becomes a 5 power double striker for the turn, so 10 damage right off the bat. Not to mention other instants and sorceries you might have cast that turn. I really like cards like this. The problem here is that it's a 1/3 without any help, so kind of like Wee Dragonauts or Young Pyromancer or something. They're just decks that don't want this. Even if you're red-blue, if you're more of a creature-based like tempo deck and you just have like 6 or 7 instants or sorceries, this card gets a little bit worse, but I would still play it. If you're really low on instants or sorceries, this is very cuttable even if it's in color. But from what I've seen so far, blue especially has a theme of cast an instants and sorceries, which will carry over from Shadows over Innistrad. So I see this card being very good, and just like the last 2 cards I saw, a very good sign that the color combination is open, that the Spells Matters deck is pretty open. I will be doing a video on the archetypes and how they're changing as far as draft goes, with 2 packs of Eldritch Moon and 1 pack of Shadows over Innistrad, and you'll probably see these uncommons come up in that draft set quite a bit. Oftentimes the uncommons will dictate what a color combination is supposed to be doing. So for instance, blue-red is supposed to be casting instants or sorceries. It just makes sense. I'm feeling like blue. I thought blue-green was going to be the emerge colors, but we've already seen an emerge card in black, and I'm sure there are a couple more at common or uncommon we haven't seen yet. Lashweed Lurker is an 8 mana emerge card that's blue-green and 5 for its emerge cost, but 8 mana for its total cost. Again, I don't know why you can cast this for 8. I don't know why you ever would. It just gives you so much of an advantage, especially cards like this. This is incredible. But keep in mind that you can't reduce the blue or green cost. So at very minimum, this is going to cost 2 if you sacrifice a 5-drop creature. But I've said it with every card so far. I always imagine sacrificing a 3-drop creature. That just lets you play this on curve on turn 4, which gives you a huge advantage. And what it does is when you cast it, you can put target non-land permanent on top of its owner's library. That effect is usually pretty good on certain types of cards like Griptide. Gone Missing is, hit or miss depending on what you're playing against. But when that effect comes attached to a 5/4 body that you really only paid 4 mana for, you can get a huge, huge advantage. These effects really punish your opponent when they're behind. It just keeps them behind. Like if your opponent's missing land drops or something, you just put a creature back on top of the deck and suddenly they're missing a land drop for the next turn. I really like this kind of effect. I think this card's solid. It does kind of push you towards being 2-color combinations, so I don't know if I would take it. This is essentially a gold card. I know it's colorless, but think of it like a gold card. So I don't know if blue-green is supposed to be like the emerge colors because Investigate was primarily blue-green and they needed to replace it, but we have seen a black emerge card too, so I don't know. We'll have to wait until the end of this week when we get the full spoiler. Moving on to yesterday's cards, Incendiary Flow is 2 mana for a sorcery. It's 1 in a red, and it says deal 3 damage to target creature or player. If a creature's dealt damage, exile it instead. So a carbonize basically, but for 2 mana or a lightning strike. That's a sorcery, however you want to think about it. Will this see standard play? I don't know. Red is at a very weak point, but red is getting some tools here that could really help. In limited, this is just absolutely good card. The type of card that you would often second pick or even first pick out of a really bad pack. Just removal is king. People say that for a reason, especially burn spells like this. Being sorcery doesn't really hurt it that much. But I'll still play sorcery removal if it deals with half the creatures in my opponent's deck. Remember that the general power and toughness of Eldritch Moon is going to be much higher than the general power and toughness of Shadows over Innistrad, so you're going to have a lot of creatures that won't straight up just die to Incendiary Flow, but it's still just such a good removal spell, and the fact that you can just toss it at your opponent to win games sometimes is really what makes burn a very appealing option, or burn spells, I should say. Deploy the Gatewatch, probably simultaneously the most disappointing and most exciting mythic from the set. Disappointing because it's absolute garbage and limited. If you get this in a sealed pool, you're like, oh, okay, well, there's one rare I can't use ever. So it's 4 and 2 white for a sorcery that says, look at the top 7 cards of your library, put 2 Planeswalkers onto the battlefield from there, and then put the rest on the bottom. Now, in order to really hit on this in Standard, you do have to have a lot of Planeswalkers in your deck, But with cards like Oath of Nissa out there and just generally good mana fixing, and cards like this and Call the Gatewatch and the really OP planeswalkers that we have in standard right now, this card seems like a huge payoff. Just imagine hitting like a Chandra and I don't know, like a Jace or an Ob Nixilis, something to clear off creatures, like something to give you card advantage and clear off creatures at the same time. You could potentially hit like Sorin plus, I don't know, and take your pick. You hit 2 planeswalkers for 6 mana. That's great. This is fantastic. Like Collected Company hits 2 creatures and usually just sweeps up the game. This hits like 2 absolute powerhouse cards, which you can definitely use to do some damage to your opponent. Most of the planeswalkers, if not all of them in standard right now, are really powerful, besides Kiora. So yeah, and I could see this in modern. Like this can grab it. I don't know what deck. I'm just visualizing like grabbing an Ugin and a Karn at the same time. It seems insane. One thing that I should point out before I move on from this card, besides, there's no point talking about it for limited. It's garbage in limited, but people like the best case scenario cards like this, like, oh, this is 6 mana for 2 planeswalkers. Well, no, not always. You will brick sometimes. Even in a really dedicated creature deck, you brick on Collected Company sometimes. You have to imagine that there are situations where you'll play this and you'll only hit 1 planeswalker. Unless you have like a critical mass of planeswalkers. We're talking like 15 planeswalkers or plus or something like that. Having about 10 planeswalkers in your deck means that you're also very likely to hit this. But I didn't do the math completely. But if you're just running, you know, like 4 Gideons and 4 Nissas in your token deck, like this is going to brick sometimes. And this is only going to hit planeswalkers, are going to hit 1 planeswalker a percentage of the time too, so you have to be prepared for that. Don't assume that this card is just going to get you out of the situation 100% of the time, even though I think the percentage of the times that it hits 2 in the right kind of deck, if you construct it well, will be much better than the times where you just brick on it. Moving on. 2 cards that are decent in limited and outside limited potentially. Soulless Soul is a 1 in a white spirit with flying, and it's in appropriate spirit colors. It is white and it is a rare, and it says sacrifice it, creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. Sure. 2/1 flyer for 2 is like a standard, decent, playable, limited card. Maybe not like the bombiest of cards that you want to open in packs, but I imagine this aside, Rattle Chains or really any kind of spirit synergy. And be honest, spirits, I think they forgot about spirits. Spirits have like no payoff in limited or standard right now. There are a bunch of them, but they just don't do anything together. Rattle Chains is kind of like the card keeping them together. But this is just a generally good white card. Kind of, well, this might be a bit of a stretch, but kind of like a Mother of Runes type effect where your opponent has to keep in mind that you have this effect available to you. And even though it's broadcast on the card when you play it, sometimes they can't always play around it. This is a really strong effect, usually reserved for like instants or something, and it usually doesn't hit your entire team, but this is a really nice effect. If you have an instant speed way to flash this in with Rattle Chains, for instance, it gets a lot better. But the card's solid. I would definitely draft it and first pick it out of most packs, but it's not the most exciting thing in the world. I will admit that. I did skip a card here on accident, and we should not be skipping cards because this one is bonkers. Cryptbreaker is the 1 mana zombie we wanted. It's not Gravecrawler, but it will definitely fill that 1-drop slot, which I said before is what we needed to make zombies playable, and I think zombies is a very playable deck right now. Will it be tier 1 deck? I don't know, but at least tier 2, if not like 1.5 or whatever you want to call it. Anyway, we got a 1 mana 1/1 zombie that says for 1 in a black, you can tap it and discard a card to put a 2/2 zombie on the battlefield. Okay, so you can scale this 1-drop into turn 2, make a 2/2. That's pretty good. You've already got 3 power by turn 2. And then you can tap 3 untapped zombies you control, including him as one of them, and you draw a card and lose a life. This is awesome. Zombies are not really known for their draw power. I have a zombie EDH deck, and you kind of have to struggle outside of the zombie creatures to draw a lot of cards. This is fantastic. Like, not only is this good and limited, it's very unassuming as a 1 mana 1/1, but I assume if you get this on turn 1, it's crazy. If you get it later on, you can still make use of it. But this is really, really good. Very, very solid in standard, too. The fact that you can pitch things like Prized Amalgam to your graveyard, or Giralf's Masterpiece, Stitched Scab, or Stitchwing Scab, or whatever it's called. You can just toss them to the graveyard, make a 2/2. So you're building up the board and building up your graveyard at the same time, which is what you want to be doing with zombies. And then use this for draw power later in the game is just absolutely incredible. This card is fantastic. And I'm like, we were, I think everybody was waiting to see if we would get a 1-drop zombie. And I think this card is good enough to fill that role. They could have given us some crappy vanilla zombie or like a dire graph ghoul, and that would have been okay. But this card is actually just really good. Anyway, let's not skip any more cards. Let's look at Liliana. This is obviously a card that everybody was excited for, and I've heard a lot of disappointment, but get over yourself, right? Anyway, you've got 1 black and black, and that already screams 3-mana Planeswalker. I really dissed Nissa when it came out of Oath of the Gatewatch, but look where Nissa's at right now. That card is brutal to play against. I hate it. 3 mana is just so early for you to get a Planeswalker. It's basically like for the rest of the game, you just get to cast a sorcery every turn for free, and not use up any card advantage. But I can see how people might be disappointed. Anyway, Liliana starts at 3. You can plus her up and give up to 1 target creature -2/-1 until end of turn. This is kind of like the flip side of Jace Vryn's Prodigy, except it gives -2/-1, so it can actually kill creatures. Kill tokens and stuff like that. It actually matches up really, really well against Nissa because it kills off her tokens while also plussing. And this lasts until your next turn, so it does shrink a creature down, which is a pseudo protection effect. Planeswalkers are better when they have protection effects, and this is definitely it. If your opponent's relying on like their Sylvan Advocate to take Liliana down, this is going to minus it to the point where they can't really do that. The -2 says put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard, then you may return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand, so you get to regrow a creature out of your graveyard. People are looking at this like, oh, that's a disappointing -2, but it's essentially draw a card in the right kind of deck. Not only is Liliana going to be good in Delirium decks, but also good in zombie decks, where you can regrow the creatures out of your graveyard. Your graveyard is a resource, and Liliana really helps to fuel that, while also helping get you card advantage. So people are looking at this as like card disadvantage or something, are not looking at it the right way. This is card advantage in the right kind of deck. It will brick sometimes, but the fact that you can grab any creature out of your graveyard means Liliana gets a little bit better later on too. You can just use this as a 3-mana regrowth that soaks up some damage when she gets killed, and that's fine too. And then the -7 is you get an emblem with, at the beginning of your end step, put X 2/2 zombie creature tokens onto the battlefield, where X is 2 plus the number of zombies you control. So auto-include in zombies, it does take a while to get that -7, because she starts at 3, you have to go 4, 5, 6, 7, and then, -7. That's 5 turns before she ultimates, not to mention you're probably going to use the -2 a couple times, so don't expect that emblem to come up very often. It very likely won't. But lots of zombie tribal, and this is just a decent card on its own. Or the emblem is just decent on its own if you're not playing a zombie deck. It gives you 4 power and toughness for free at every end step. And you have to imagine that like Virulent Plague does shut that down, but Virulent Plague's only around until September, and then no more token killers. Well, there are token killers, but they're, 4 power and toughness for free every turn is nothing to scoff at. And then if you have extra zombies, you just get extra creatures. So I really, really like Liliana. The card is solid. The card is underrated, I think. It's perfectly great, and I would not. Some people are calling it bulk mythic. I'm like, nah, definitely not. Don't underrate 3-mana Planeswalkers. They are very strong. You can underrate 2-mana Planeswalkers. They suck. All one of them. Oath of Liliana. Kind of saw this coming. It's a legendary enchantment like the others. It's 2 and a black, and it says when it enters the battlefield, each opponent sacks a creature. Okay. And then at the beginning of the end step, if a Planeswalker entered the battlefield under your control, put a 2/2 black zombie token onto the battlefield. So this is okay. We still have Fleshbag Marauder right now, so I don't really see it taking play unless you are really, really heavy in Planeswalkers. This is interesting because the second ability is actually the effect that I would want to use the most off of it, whereas most of the other oaths, it's the first ability. I think with the exception of Oath of Nissa, and maybe Oath of Gideon, but that card doesn't see a lot of play, surprisingly. I think it will with Tameo, by the way. But this is interesting because we already have Sack Effect, we have Fell Tongue Invocation, we have, To the Slaughter, and those cards aren't seeing a lot of play right now simply because company decks and token decks are so strong against Sack Effects. So Oath of Liliana absolutely not cutting it against cards like that. But the second ability is interesting because if you can repeatedly get your opponent, or repeatedly get these 2/2 zombies out of a Planeswalker-based deck, a Super Friends deck, then you have blockers, you have attackers, you have other things to do and put pressure on your opponent without relying solely on your Planeswalker. So I don't think this card is super exciting. I would see bulk rare status, but I don't know. Let me know what you think about the Oath. It is nice that it completes the cycle, though. Falija Academy, we're wrapping up here, maybe 4 or 5 left. It is a longer video, I think, but Falija Academy is just a land that taps for colorless. It's not legendary, it doesn't come in tapped or anything, just a utility land. And it says if a spell or ability an opponent controls causes you to discard a card, you may reveal it and put it on top of your library instead of put it in anywhere else. So this is really good against Thoughtseize effects. This is really good against, duresses and things like that. There are a lot of discard spells in Standard right now, and I can see this in EDH, maybe even Modern, where certain decks try to strip your hand, like Jund and stuff. But the fact that it taps for colorless is a little off-putting in Modern, so I don't know about that. Maybe as a sideboard card, I don't know. But the one complaint I have here is that some of the most potent discard in Standard right now is Thought-Knot Seer and Transgress the Mind, and I can see that Distended Mindbreaker really hit in Standard. But those cards actually exile the card that's chosen from your hand, so this won't interact with it at all. It has to specifically be discarded. And, there aren't a lot of cards in Standard outside of, like, Duress that actually just straight up discard from your hand. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I don't play a lot of Standard, but yeah, this just doesn't do it against a lot of cards. I think even Infinite Obliteration is just name a card and exile them. It doesn't discard. So this card is very niche. Seems more like Eternal or Modern playable card. Probably not intended for Standard unless we get a lot of discard cards. We have seen the Delirium card, that's the random discard too, but remember this is still going to give you card disadvantage. It's not countering card disadvantage, it's just letting you put those cards back on top. So essentially it can time walk yourself, but if you really lose a clutch piece to a discard spell, you can put it back on top and make sure you draw it again. I don't know. I don't think the card should see Standard play at the moment unless the Delirium card is really popular, but even then it only fits in certain kind of decks. It does bog your mana down since it only taps for colorless, but I don't know. Maybe I'm misevaluating it. So some German stuff going on here. United Resistance. This card is crazy good. It's 1 and double red for a sorcery with Escalate 1. So remember that means you can pay an extra mana to choose an extra mode on it, and you can do that up to twice. So you can essentially pay 5 mana to use all 3 modes on this, or 4 to use 2, or just leave it as 1 mode for 3. But the 3 modes are A, target player discards all cards in his or her hand, then draws that many cards. So you can use that on yourself to kind of get a better hand, or you can use it on your opponent if you think they're loaded and kind of diminish the things they've been holding on to. The second ability here, ability B, is United Resistance deals 4 damage to target creature. So 3 mana, 4 damage to target creature is pretty decent. A little more expensive than something like Roast in Standard, but in Limited, that's awesome. Bathe in Dragonfire was a great card from Fate Reforged, and just large amounts of damage for cheaper removal is pretty great. And then the last one is deal 3 damage to target opponent. So this is the type of card I would definitely hold on to until I have at least 4. I would want to use at least the second 2 abilities. The first one is the least appealing here, except in certain circumstances. Oftentimes, if I have an extra mana open, I wouldn't mind escalating this to the third ability just so I can get my opponent to discard their hand, because if they're not casting things, they're probably sandbagging good creatures that I want to get rid of. The second 2 abilities is where this is at. So for 4 mana, this is burn a creature for 4, deal 3 to your face, which is very, very good in Limited. Pretty strong in Standard as well. I would definitely play this over Exquisite Firecraft or alongside Exquisite Firecraft as a way to deal with both a creature and a player at the same time. The problem with cards like Firecraft is you have to choose one or the other. So if you're getting beat down, you're using your burn on creatures when you really want to be using it on your opponent. So 4 mana is the sweet spot here. 5 mana is just the extra gravy on top, but this is a very strong card. I'm not a burn player, but I'm sure burn players are happy to see it. I believe one more, and then a couple cards that came out late Sunday morning or Monday morning. Ishkana Graf Widow is a 5 mana legendary spider, because legendary spider, it's a 3/5 with reach, because spider, and it has Delirium. It says when it enters the battlefield, if you have 4 or more card types in your graveyard, put 3 1/2 spider tokens with reach onto the battlefield. So imagine you have Delirium. This thing is coming down with a total of 6 power, a total of 11 toughness across 4 different bodies that all have reach. So bye-bye flyer deck. And then we have an activated ability here, 6 and a black. Target opponent loses 1 life for each spider you control. So at its maximum, this is 4. We don't have too many spiders from Shadows over Innistrad. The only one that comes to mind is, I don't even think of its name. The one that can block 6,000 creatures. Watcher in the Web, right? So you're not going like Spider Tribal here, really. But the cool thing is the activated ability does include black mana. So this is a black-green creature as far as a commander goes. I don't know if people were like dying to have a legendary spider or something like that, but if you were, here you go. Anyway, this card is very powerful. It's fine. It's like a kind of dumb vanilla creature if you don't have Delirium going, and it'd be like an okay inclusion in most green decks. But if you can really get that Delirium on before you play this, this card is an absolute bomb. Just so much power and toughness across so many bodies. And the fact that they all have reach means they're good blockers in addition to whatever. The activated ability, if you get to that point, that is extra damage every turn. Well, life loss every turn. That's quite relevant if you get to activate it over and over again. So this card's super solid. Don't know if it needs to be a mythic, but it is a mythic, so there you go. Moving on, I think we got maybe 4 left here. Providence is 5 and double white for sorcery. It is a rare. And it says, reveal this card from your opening hand. You may reveal it from your opening hand. If you do, at the beginning of your first upkeep, your life total becomes 26. And then you can just cast this for 7 and your life total becomes 26. So standard, I think this card is super, super dumb. Unless burn decks become a real thing, or unless there's just like a race that you need to win. 7 is a lot for just a life gain card, although this card can gain you like 20 plus life in certain situations, so it could be a saving grace. In limited, I would definitely play the first copy of this, never play more than 1 copy of it. But if you don't have it in your opening hand, it's like, okay. But if you draw it later in the game, it can just, a lot of times limited comes down to, you know, points for points. So if you're the one who jumps back up 25 life, your opponent finally got you down to 1 and you're like, my life total's 26 now, deal with it, then it just feels miserable for your opponent. This is a huge life gain, enough to justify playing it, and having that extra 6 life at the beginning of the game is pretty decent, assuming you survive to your first upkeep, because you can die before that. No, you can't. I like it. It's a little wonky. It's the type of card where you look at it and you're like, what? Anyway, the mana source spoiled this card at midnight on Sunday or Monday or whatever. So if you haven't seen that video, go check it out, because it's cooler when the people who spoil it do the videos. But Spirit of the Hunt is 1 green, 3 mana for a flash 3/3. It's a wolf spirit. Spirit and wolf, those are relevant. More wolf than anything. But when it enters the battlefield, each other creature you control that's a wolf or werewolf gets +0/+3 until end of turn. So this is supposed to be, it's supposed to either win you a really complicated combat in a werewolf deck or wolf deck, or I imagine it's supposed to be an anti-sweeper, so it gets you right above Languish for almost every werewolf or wolf in the format, except for 1 toughness ones. It really pushes out Radiant Flames. If you watch the Mana Source video, he said everything that needs to be said about this card, but was this what Wolves were looking for? Maybe not. But it is a very, very nice card to have. It's the type of card that by itself, it's just a 3/3 flash, which if you're playing cards like Howlpack Resurgence, it gets even stronger. But the fact that it comes down and it gives a very significant boost to all of your wolves and werewolves, then it's really good. In Limited, I would completely ignore the wolf and werewolf thing and still play this as a solid 3/3 flash for 3. And then if I'm in a dedicated wolf-werewolf deck, it really takes off from there. This can win you a limited game if you use it at the right time, in the right situations where a bunch of attacks and blocks are going on. It doesn't get its own boost, which is fine, but that is something worth noting. So don't assume this comes down as a 3/6 for the turn, because it doesn't. So this might actually still die to whatever sweeper is trying to hit you, but it will save all your other stuff. So it's kind of like the martyr for wolves or something like that. Summary Dismissal, another really cool card. Again, I don't love counter spells, but here you go. This is 2 blue, 4 mana instant that says exile all other spells and counter all abilities. That counter all abilities is super cool. So first off, a lot of times this will just be used as a counter spell. 4 mana counter spell is not good, so you really want to get value out of it by using it in the right situations. Now, what can this do? First off, this is like anti-Eldrazi type card. I assume that's kind of the idea here. When you cast an Eldrazi, or rather when your opponent casts an Eldrazi, they get their cast trigger while the Eldrazi is still in the stack. So if you counter their Eldrazi, they're still getting it. So if they cast Ulamog and you counter Ulamog, they're still going to exile 2 permanents even though you exiled or counter Ulamog. What this does is your opponent casts Ulamog, their exile trigger goes on the stack. You say, no, I'm not about this life right now. Summary Dismissal, counter your Ulamog, end its ability. Like, boom, there you go. So it's an all-purpose counter spell. You can use this in a very clutch situation to just counter an activated ability or even a triggered ability or something like that. This can counter like Demonic Pact Resolution or something like that, the lose the game thing. I don't know. There are a lot of things you can do with it. This can counter a Planeswalker's ultimate ability. Your opponent's been building up for 7 turns, and they're like, gotcha, I'm going to sack Tamiyo and get Omniscience and Ancestral Recall. And you're like, no, counter Tamiyo's ability, and your Tamiyo's dead. Bye. So this is very flexible. And it justifies being 4 mana. I don't know that it'll see standard play, but I think it's good sideboard tech against cards like the new Emrakul and Ulamog especially, while having some other pretty niche things. Another cool thing this does is it can exile in response to a Flipwalker and stop them from flipping. If your opponent goes to like activate their Liliana or Nissa or something, you're just like counter it and it's gone. So this can be used as a removal spell on certain cards, cards that exile themselves, but I don't know. It has a lot of applications. It's a really cool card for a counter spell, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it impacts Standard. And I think final card here, yep, Turn Aside. I believe I talked about, yep, Tamiyo. So Turn Aside was just came out of Game Former over the weekend or something like that. I believe it's a reprint. I don't know what from what set, if it is a reprint at all. But it's a 1 blue instant that says counter target spell that targets a permanent you control. So essentially this gives your creature hexproof in response. I mean, that's not ideally what it does, but it's a good way of thinking of it. So a card like Ranger's Guile or something like that, it's used to fizzle a removal spell, which is good in particular against Declaration in Stone, because it stops your opponent from also being able to exile the other cards with the same name. But, it gets Anguished Unmaken. It gets all the same things that I talked about with the Mirror Dragon. Basically, anything that targets one of your creatures can be countered. And there's a lot of that going on in Standard right now. It doesn't, fizzle an ability that's targeting. It's just a spell, and you have to keep in mind, like, we still have Dispel in Standard. So that can counter instants. And we have Invasive Surgery, which if all you're doing is using Turn Aside to counter a sorcery, Invasive Surgery is actually better than this card in most situations, because you might get that Delirium and get the other copies, or it can copy, or it can hit certain sorceries that aren't targeting your things. This is very, very narrow card, but it's the type of card that in Limited I would really like having access to, because it It just fizzles your opponent's removal spell, and the fact that it costs 1 means it trades up on value. So it's a decent card. I wouldn't main deck it a lot of times, and if it does see standard play, it's probably a main deck or a sideboard card. Sorry, but it is there, and it is another option for people who are playing very controlling decks or even blue-based creature decks where you don't want your creatures to die. It's any permanent, by the way. If it targets a land or something, then you can still fizzle it. But I don't know. Dromoka's Command. This can fizzle a Dromoka's Command, which is pretty nice. Or a Kolaghan's Command that's targeted an artifact or something like that. I don't know. There are a lot of applications. But anyway, I know this was a really long video, so if you stuck around, then thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to watch this video. I appreciate it. But we went through a bunch of cards. I'm going to try to stay on these. We got pretty much 2 more days of spoilers here, and then we're going to get the full spoiler on Friday like normal, and you'll get to see all the chaff that's not super exciting, but and all the terrible common reprints that Wizards decided to put in this set. But anyway, I'm super pumped about this set. It's awesome. The flavor is great. The creatures are awesome. The archetypes seem really well defined and really strong, and I really love that they're pushing this Delirium deck and the zombie deck into standard. They want to see it in standard. They gave us the tools we need to make it happen. Someone just has to build the deck. I'm not really the guy for that, so if you're building the Delirium deck, share it with the world. Go win a Pro Tour or something. I don't know. Anyway, my name is Timothy. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all next time.